Kia ora, good evening. Welcome along to the Fortune Theatre for the second of our panel discussions for this, the New Zealand Young Writers Festival, produced by the Dunedin Fringe and presented by Phantom Bill Stickers, and brought to you with the support of the Dunedin City Council, among others, the first and hopefully annual New Zealand Young Writers Festival. This evening we're talking about, this panel is called You're Either With Us or Against Us, Working with Editors. And we've assembled a crew of editors from a fairly broad spectrum of media, going from your left to right. This is Kirsti Whalen from the Pantograph Punch. We have Marcus Stickley from The Wireless, which is Radio New Zealand's youth platform. Leonie Hayden, who's the editor of Mana magazine, and Duncan Greive, who edits the website The Spinoff, and also 1972 magazine. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. There's a great quote from Neil Gaiman when he talks about how to make it as a writer, that you have to be good, you have to be nice, and you have to be punctual, but that you don't have to be all three of those things, you only have to be two of them. So you can be nice and punctual and get away with not being that good, or you can be great and an asshole as long as you're on time. So I just wondered if anybody had any comments on that as an opening gambit from an editor's perspective.
I mean, I'd just take punctual a lot of weeks.
I think from our I don't know, I think you always have to be good in everything else. Good or open to criticism, which I think is the same thing. But if you're really rubbish, but super nice, like I get a lot of those people and they're just no good to me. So.
Yeah, I feel like the good part, if they're really good, you'll accept almost anything. I used to work on this magazine, Real Groove, and the hip-hop columnist turned in his copy, handwritten on whatever he had around, and whenever he chose to get it in. And it was like this, it was just a nightmare for the editor on so many levels. But he was, I still think, like the best music columnist from this country I've ever read, and so you just accept it. Later he graduated to floppy disk, which was like amazing. So that was huge for me. That was during my day. So I was very grateful for that. But yeah, I really think, I mean, the talent thing is super important, but the being a nice person is not that difficult, and especially in an era where there's not like a crazy amount of money flowing through this thing. Like, why not just grease the wheel that way?
It's also amazing how many people are trying to work as journalists who are none of those three. I find that astounding.
I mean, I wonder, just going back to the idea of deadlines and punctuality for a second, online publishing, you would think it isn't so much of a nightmare because, you know, you're not putting the magazine to print, and if this thing isn't in it, then that's a spanner in the works completely. But on the other hand, you know, the online culture is immediate, and everyone trying to be ahead of the game constantly. So do you think that it's the pressure to get stuff in deadlines-wise is greater even at an online platform than it is for print magazine?
I think it totally depends on the nature of the content. Like if it is timely, then you want to be first, or at least, you know, kind of catching that wave of interest. But, you know, definitely on the wireless, we work on content that is a bit timeless, and so deadlines will get set, and, you know, if the work isn't up to scratch, then it's like, okay, go away, do some more work, and make sure it's up to standard.
Those contributors must be worth their weight in gold, the ones that can turn stuff around really quickly and hand in really clean, nice copy.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And they're usually people with newsroom experience. Yeah.
I think like, I've never worked in print, being a few years younger than the rest of the panel. I've only edited digital content. I think what is important is those sort of down to the wire timelines in terms of like social media. Like if you get an article late on a day, for example, and you've already published one piece that day, the next piece will get lost in the algorithm. But if you've already scheduled something for the next day, so there is a sort of a pernickety little thing there, but it's in terms of sharing the content, I think, as opposed to actually putting it out there for us. Yeah.
I mean, picking up on your point, Marcus, about sending people away and working to work on it again. I've talked before about how there's a real sense of anxiety as a writer. Full disclosure, I've worked with two of these people in the past, but after this I may not ever again. There's a real anxiety when you send off a piece of writing to your editor and then you never hear from them again, and then it appears in a mildly sub-edited form in print or online, and you don't, I mean, there's no feedback. I mean, we know that what we've written isn't perfect, so surely there's something, but often there's nothing. And I know that some of this is about resourcing, particularly if you're turning around, weekly deadlines. But I wonder, how much of a role do you think, for want of a better term, creative professional development is an obligation for the editor?
I think that, that's actually one of my big regrets from the first magazine I edited, Real Greive, as I mentioned before. We paid 20 cents a word, which wasn't great then and is worse now, but it's probably, relatively common still. In fact, in some situations, you might consider it pretty good. And my mentality at the time, and I regret it, was that, because we were paying so poorly, people wouldn't want to go back and rewrite things. And when I look back now, I just wish that I'd given more feedback. And because and I was predominantly working with young writers, the best thing you can do for them is to give them feedback and in quite some detail and allow them to learn and grow from that experience, rather than just, oftentimes you just wouldn't hire them because it became so much work for you. And that was something I kind of had to learn in time, and I should credit the guy who I think is probably the best overall editor in New Zealand, Simon Wilson, who edits Metro now, who is absolutely terrifying to submit copy to. Not initially, but as soon as you get your first round of feedback and it's longer than the thing you submitted, and you just want the earth to swallow you and never give you up again. But the actual process, they're good words. I don't always agree with Simon's edits, but between his vision for the magazine and how much he cares so freaking deeply about every word in that magazine, I just admire it so much. And I do think whatever you're paying someone, it's so incumbent upon you as an editor to sweat every word and to give feedback. And that experience you're describing, I've had so many times writing for all kinds of publications, and I really think that when it happens, it is reflective of, a systemic failure. Because yes, there's a resource issue, but truly you owe it to the reader no matter what. And if it means you have to work a 15-hour day from time to time, we'll suck it up. You're lucky to have the job.
Yeah. With the Wilds from the outset, one of our goals was to have it be a place where young talent could be nurtured, and that was people on staff as well as contributors, and it's just a really big part of what we do. And I think it is really important to give feedback, because people are taking their time sending the work. Yeah, they're getting paid for it, but there are people with lots of promise out there, and I think the good ones really want to give them a chance.
We have a system at the Pantograph Punch where it's founded on the idea of workshopping. So actually Roosevelt, who is sort of at the helm, she originally started the publication because she missed that process after doing, I believe she did an MA or at least was involved in a creative writing program, and wanted to work with friends to provide feedback. And so that's a huge principle of what we do, and I think is so important. There's very few pieces that ever are published that haven't been through several and sometimes 20 rounds of feedback, and that goes for our pieces as well. Like, we send them to each other, we edit them, we workshop them, and I think it's such an important and productive part of the job and of publishing in general. So.
Yeah. When I was working at the Nelson Mail, there was hardly any feedback. It's a real sink or swim environment, but you had to survive on your own. And so I guess the reason for that, having that go off the wireless was because of that. So I think you were really lucky, Duncan, in having someone there to provide that feedback. I've kind of reached the same conclusion, but through kind of an opposite experience.
Yeah, I know that in my early days of editing, my main reasons for just wanting to get something done and published or submitted to the designer, there was an element of, I've just got so much work to get through, I don't have time to reply to everyone, which is a really shitty attitude for an editor to have. But there was also this weird element of, oh, I just don't want to be mean. You know, and like I think that was really hard for me to get over, is trying to sort of separate that idea of criticism being a bad thing, with criticism being a helpful thing. And when I saw that question of yours, Aaron, ahead of time, I was like, oh my God, I owe Aaron an apology. Aaron did write for me when I was editing Rip It Up magazine, and that was my first big editing job, and it was so much work, and I did that to so many of my contributors. And it's just now in my work at Mana, where creative development is a much bigger part, because I'm trying to publish Māori writers and journalists. So the creative development part of that is even more important, because it's a much small pool of talent that I'm working with. And it's really opened my eyes to just how many mistakes I have made in the past as an editor. So, sorry, Aaron.
Oh, it's water under the bridge. Don't worry about it.
I do feel like there's a bit of an art to giving feedback in a really, like, you know, you have to be honest, but I think like you want to be generous and patient with someone who's starting out, but you've got to be honest, and you've got to stay true to the vision of your publication. But yeah.
And being edited by someone very good, like Duncan said, you're just like, oh God, I'm the worst person alive. I'm such a terrible writer.
Oh, see, I had the opposite feeling.
Once you come out that feeling, out the other side, you make your changes, you take a look at their vision and the improvements it's made to your piece, and you're just like that, I'm a better writer under a good editor.
I get so excited being edited. I'm like, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. When someone like deletes a sentence and writes transubstantiated, and you're like, yes. This excites me.
Often this happens at the Pantograph. I mean, many people in this room, and probably many of us, will have been asked to work for free or for very low rates of pay under the auspices of this is good exposure for you as a writer, us delivering you to this audience. But I wonder whether the value proposition shouldn't be more, I mean, is it a better sell if it's an educational proposition and, you know, we will work with you to develop your writing, rather than this kind of mythical great audience that you can be served on a platter to? I mean, is that not for editors, do you think that's not a better pitch to prospective writers than exposure is?
It depends on the publication. Like if Rural News is trying to get you to work for free because of all the creative development they're going to give you, probably not going to be that attracted to it.
Remember where you are, Leonie.
But I feel like someone like the Pantograph Punch, if they offered to work with you in a workshop and kind of environment with the sort of stellar reputation that they've got for producing really great writers, you'd just be like thrilled with the idea.
Although we pay, except for reviews, but you get free books. But I have quite a strong opinion on this. I think it's a better pitch, but it's still not a pitch that I'm okay with. I think a really important thing that we're facing right now is diversity in the literary community and in journalism. And the only people who can afford to work for professional development or exposure are people who can live anyway. And if we keep not paying our writers, we're closing that world. I mean, I think, I'm trying to recall the statistic, I think The Atlantic published something about how 93% of political writing in the 2012 election was by white people. And I think the whole sort of internship idea, unpaid internships and all of this just feeds into that. So yeah, it's a better pitch, but it's still not a pitch that I'm okay with, if we want to encourage diversity.
I think it depends on the situation, the person who wants to do that. Like, you know, what do they actually have to offer? Like, sure, if they're inexperienced, you know, like you can create avenues for them to, you know, test out their writing skill if they have no portfolio. But, you know, if they've actually got stuff published, then you want to pay them, you know, because you want quality work, and if people are going to do quality work, I think you should pay them for it. And then, you know, so we, you know, have like a little, we call like weekly listening, and it's just like reviews of songs. And so if someone says, hey, you know, I really want to write, but I don't have anything in my portfolio, you know, I'm just starting out, and it's like, yeah, like write some reviews and see how you go, and then you can build up from there.
And reviews are a good way into that, I think. It's a good way to kind of flex your muscle with that. I don't know, putting too much in the line or something.
I think some of the first published stuff I had was music reviews. It's probably the same with you
Yeah.
guys as well.
Yeah. Reviews for Duncan, actually.
Yeah.
A breaking rec words compilation
Yeah.
that I'm terrified to ever read. I mean, you're all the four of you are all editors, obviously, and as I said, in a range of formats, but you're all writers before then. And I wonder, what is there anything, and if so, what, that you wished you knew about the editor-writer relationship or about the editing process before you were in that job?
Take me out for a beer.
Is that going to be your rote answer?
Yeah, this is no, but I think a personal relationship with your editor is super cool. Like, you know, if I had known that earlier, I would have been more chilled out. I would have stopped shaking hands and just hung out, I think. Because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong in that, but I think it's really important to just have a dialogue with people.
I think once you get there, that's really good. Like when you're making an initial pitch, I think like a succinct, like when you're pitching something to an editor with whom you don't have any relationship with, and you know your profile is such that perhaps you can't assume that they're aware of you or your work, or maybe you don't even have any. I think it's really important to make sure that the email kind of starts to convey some of your sensibilities. So obviously, you don't want it to be epically long, so the editor's just sort of dying just by opening it. But you do get like periodically I'm sent pictures which are, which contain kind of spelling mistakes are sort of sloppily assembled, and it's just frustrating because you're like, if this is the kind of care and attention you make to your initial content, because that's the most important one you'll ever send to that editor, then what are your kind of professional standards like? And as much as like I would say to any young writer, write for the Pantograph Punch first, because they are extraordinary copy editors. Like, and it doesn't matter who you are when you go along to them, it gets looked at real hard. But I guess the point is that there are a lot of places. I don't know. You get a sloppy email. You often don't have a lot of the way of resource. The idea of having to workshop the hell out of something to get it to publishable form, it just weighs on you. And there are going back to your original kind of that Neil Gaiman quote, like there are writers who I admire so much, who I love the copy of, but it comes in where it's with hours and hours and hours ahead of me, and I really struggle to commission their work because I know that internally I don't necessarily have the resource to get it there. So with that first email, I think pay and with anything that you subsequently submit, you really should read that thing 10 times before you send it in. I think that really matters.
And also know the publication and the editor that you're sending that first email to inside and out. I get way too many pitches from people who think that we're a monthly publication, or who think that we're, government funded, or just sort of don't seem to really even looked at the About Us on the website. And I just think that's a lazy and weird way to approach what you are obviously intending to be your career. It's like you should know my bio, you should know the magazine's bio, and you should know how often we come out and the kinds of features that we write about. I think that quite a small amount of research gets overlooked quite a lot.
For aspiring journalists in many cases.
Yeah.
It's not a great signal.
Great signal. Along with the spelling mistakes.
So just picking up a little bit further down the story development chain from what Duncan was talking about, I think writers need to understand that they have to fully own their work. Every word, sentence, make sure that it's factually correct. One of the worst experiences I've had with a contributor at the Wireless is someone who came back with a piece that was late and full of factual errors, and when I went back to them, they told me it was my job to fact check it and get it right. And
they have people to do that.
A department even?
Here it is.
I don't think that person will, certainly never work for the Wireless again.
That's extraordinary.
But I think
it's outrageous.
I think there's also something to be said as well. Like I'm in perhaps a different phase to these guys. I've only been editing since January and still submit work to various places. And I think it is a scary thing, and probably more scary after what a lot of this conversation has been about. But I think being vulnerable is not, to me, is not ideal. If you're good, that's ideal. But if you feel like there's something that you're not necessarily hitting or worried about, saying that I think is a really positive thing, and encouraging that collaborative relationship. Perhaps it's different for us than it is at other magazines because we are very much about the workshopping process, but being able to say, hey, I'm struggling with this, I think that is quite brave in itself, and really pushes a piece forward when you can ask for help.
As an editor, like, I really appreciate people doing that, putting their hand up and saying, hey, you know, I'm struggling with this.
Yeah.
What do I need to do
I
to
do
get
too.
it back on track? And I think as an editor working with a writer, like, there's lots of questions that you can be asking through the story development process that will like help, like, one, keep them on the right track, make the story really good, and then at the end of it, when it's filed, you both know exactly what you're getting. And so I think a lot of being an editor is just coaching writers. It's really, really crucial.
And I would commission someone again who pulled out of a story when it wasn't working, as opposed to someone who delivered a bad story. Like, yeah, I would rather someone was honest and said, I can't do this, or it hasn't gone my way, or I didn't get the interview, or whatever, than someone who just kind of threw something together.
That, I mean, and I guess, like, I agree with that point. The one thing which just kind of struck me while we were talking is that some of this makes it sound like a kind of a terrifying thing, submitting to an editor, and I think it is inherently if you actually care about the thing you're doing, particularly early on in your career. But the thing I can't emphasize enough is what an unholy thrill it is to open an email that has a fantastic idea that is followed up with a fantastic piece of writing. It feels like a light that you never knew existed opening up in front of you.
Yeah.
It is the most exhilarating thing in the world, and it doesn't happen all that often. Probably like a handful of times in my career to this point, but there's no more exciting thing, because it's not just the object itself, it's the promise of what's to come. And and that could be like it could, every day that could happen, and that is when you're going through some of the more the drudgery that's associated with the job, that's the kind of thing that is incredibly exciting. And I find, honestly, like, this is a young writing festival. I'm not a particularly young writer at this point, but I feel like the sort of younger generation of writers are just like phenomenally, outrageously talented, and it's so exciting to work with them.
On a purely pragmatic level, you talk about making a pitch to an editor. What does your pitch have to be? Are you expecting people to turn in first drafts, or can it be abstracts, or just a mad idea? I mean, everyone has a mad idea that they've recited at 2 a.m. in the kitchen at a party, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be a good story. So what are you, and is that a sliding scale as to how well you know this person, or what are you expecting in accepting pitches from people?
So we are bi-monthly, so we have 6 issues a year, and I actually I schedule loose themes around each of those issues. So if someone comes to me with an idea, then I'll see if it fits with a previously scheduled theme, or if it doesn't, no big deal. If it's a great idea, then I'd just go with it. But and Mana have this peculiar situation where, because it's a Māori interest, Māori perspective title, and Needs to Be is quite an aspirational title, people sort of mix what is an aspirational idea with what I call the Māori with a job pitch, which is someone that has a great idea who comes to me and says, I've got this friend, she's Māori, she's involved with all of these iwi, and she's a lawyer. I'm like, Where's the story? You know, and it's actually just become this occupational hazard because, you know, it's like this does sound like a very inspirational young person, and they've achieved a lot of stuff, but this is a lifestyle and current events magazine. Like, how on earth does that fit in with telling stories? And so, what I'm looking for most in a story idea is a story. You know, I want someone to come to me with an idea that will take someone from here, a reader, and actually take them on a journey, and they'll end up somewhere entirely unexpected.
And profile pieces are fine, but there still has to be a narrative.
There's supposed to be a narrative. Yeah.
There's so many different versions of what you've just described, like the, hey, I'm putting out a piece of music, hey, I'm putting out a piece of book. Sorry, I'm putting out yeah, it's fine. Whatever. Anyway, yeah, and it's so frustrating. I think, like, I can almost envision my ideal pitch, and it comes in an email, and the subject line, it's 3 words that describe, like, it's almost like a kind of precursor headline for your story. Then the first sentence after you introduce yourself says exactly what the story is going to be, and there's a couple more sentences fleshing that out, and you say who you're likely to talk to, and because of the wireless, you know, quite visual, you know, what multimedia elements it might have with it, and then if it's really amazing, the person you're going to work with on creating the video to go with it. Yeah.
Does it happen often?
No.
No. It may do next week.
Yeah, hopefully. But yeah, we get a lot of pitches that are just like miniature essays, and you read it and you get to the end of it, and it's just like, you know, I've just read like 500 words. I have no idea what this person is trying to say.
The think piece generation. I got a hot take. What's your perfect pitch?
My perfect pitch? I think for me, like, maybe I would prefer a slightly longer pitch because I'm interested in style as well. I think for us there's this, I don't know. I don't really know how to describe it without sounding arrogant, but then I've only been at the Punch since January. So we have very good writers who have often quite a prosy, poetic voice, and I do look for that. Good ideas, good context that they might have already started seeking out, because I think that's a good sign. What I really don't like is often I sort of reach out to people and say, hey, I'm looking for reviewers. Hey guys, I'm looking for reviewers. If anyone wants to review stuff, come and talk to me. But then people send you a link to their blog. And I'm like, no, I don't want to read your blog. Like, there's 10,000 words on your blog. I'm a busy person. So yeah, don't send me your blog. Other than that, yeah, just style, I think. Style and a good idea. I like the Madcap story. When I read your question about sort of that kind of beat thing about like Kerouac being like, I'm going to go to Mexico and like just walk around. I'm into that, but that's probably a Punch thing.
Yeah, there is. I mean, you're so right about that level of confidence in the writer. I think if it's your first contact, maybe keeping it relatively contained. Like, don't pitch a sort of a 5,000 word cover story at your first kind of, you know, when you're the first time you come through. But oh, look, you might have it in you, but I think once you have a relationship established, you know, then it's quite a different situation. You know, you do kind of, you earn credits that you can draw down on in terms of your license to do the walking around in Mexico stories.
So you asked, talked about what kind of would be the ideal pitch. I was just wondering if, for the audience, it might be useful if we talk about like the elements that might be in an ideal story for each of our publications, like kind of what goes into that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to go for it.
Yeah.
Having given this some consideration.
I said this earlier.
Not at all. But I mean, yeah, for the wireless, like our ideal story would be like have a really diverse range of voices, like covering an issue with a national focus that's like quite contentious, and yeah, have lots of, you know, 20-something late teens voices in it, and talking about an issue that isn't generally spoken about in the mainstream media, or the voices in it are people that aren't usually heard in the mainstream media. And we've been able to do that a few times, which has been really great. Like, Recently we did a feature on what it's like to be young and unemployed in New Zealand. We had another feature on young Muslims, and that was born out of seeing all these reports with academics and senior people in the New Zealand Muslim community talking about what young people are thinking or doing or how they might be affected, particularly with the rise of ISIS and stuff. And it was just like, man, like, where are the young people in this debate? And then we did a piece on the tensions between some of the students in North Dunedin and City Council and the university, which I thought was really good as well.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else?
My perfect story, I guess, involves a lot of the same elements that Marcus has just mentioned, but sort of substitute young people for Māori people. Because you're working outside of the mainstream, I guess, in a culture, a subculture even, for who is quite often marginalised by mainstream media. So my perfect story is looking at a topic that is maybe often discussed, but never from a specifically Māori angle. And because we try to work with Māori journalists, we are coming at it from a specifically Māori angle, and that can make all the difference. Like recently, so every 2 issues, we're basically trying to do like a super feature on one of the big social or cultural issues that are facing Māori today. So 2 issues ago, we just decided we're just going to tackle education. And so it had a lot of those elements. It had a lot of different voices, and it talked to, we looked very frankly at the bad statistics, and we looked very frankly at the organisations and the initiatives that are making a positive difference. And that to me was my perfect story, because it didn't shy away from uncomfortable subject matter, because that stuff is very much a part of Māori culture, and it's very much the stuff that we have to tackle head on our own terms, rather than through a mainstream media's lens. And then by focusing on positive outcomes that are happening around New Zealand, that way we're putting our own special spin on it as well, by saying, this is where we are, but this is where we project that we're heading. And I was really thrilled with that story, and had that weird acceleration that Duncan mentioned earlier, when you get that final edit from a contributor that you've worked with sort of quite closely over a few weeks, or actually in this case it was a few months, and then you read that story, and it's just the most exciting feeling in the world.
Just a quick plug, we'll be talking more about this tomorrow afternoon on our panel Young Māori New Media that Leonie will be speaking at with Morgan Godfrey, who excites me as a writer very much, and Rob Teeper and Dr. Vijay Divadas will be chairing that, and that'll be really interesting. Same for you, Duncan, except for a reality TV contestant.
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, no, not at all. Which is not in any way to diminish the good and important work that you guys do. In fact, we do hopefully good, but definitely unimportant work at the Spinoff. Like, the world does not change. No atom is transformed by our existence. But I quite like that about it. Like having, there's definitely like, the Spinoff's a website that covers television, and television can have moments of kind of transcendent glory, but most of the time is just sort of mucking around in the mud. And we try and kind of approach it on its own terms, like rather than, I kind of get the feeling a lot of television criticism in New Zealand has periodically adopted this sighing tone, like, why isn't it all like masterpiece theatre? And it's like, because that would be so boring, we'd all be dead. And I quite like it when, I don't know, like, I guess I just want music, I want writing that is funny and doesn't necessarily kind of take accepted kind of lines, like funny and provocative, and it makes you laugh and it makes you think. Yeah, I mean, but seriously, it kind of is that. And I'm also looking for writing that is quite modern, I suppose. Not in the sense that it's sort of, impenetrable, unreadable kind of art.
Elite speak.
Yeah. Much more so that it kind of feels like it's born of the internet and is natural in that place. So we try and use, like you do, Marcus. You use imagery, use video, but also try and be very creative in our responses. We don't really publish reviews as such, which is odd for like a specific cultural form. But watching an entire TV show, it's not that a review is redundant. But it's at times you just want a kind of a more I guess a more creative response to it. So it's the Spinoff, and 1972. I just want to publish the best long-form writing in New Zealand, which doesn't seem like too much to ask. So we try and pay a pretty good rate, and we're about to launch a hero rate of $1 a word, which I don't think anyone else. So bring it on. But they're supposed to be like this beacon that says like bring like leave your A game at home and bring like your platinum, just the best thing. I want the best thing that you've ever written and maybe ever will write.
I feel like you should explain a little bit what 1972 is, because it's quite a unique publication.
Oh, thank you. No, but it is. So 1972 is a magazine which is it's edited and published by me, but it's entirely funded by a clothing company, by Barker's, and who I used to work for, and we kind of created this, I don't know, to some people it'd be like a Faustian pact where they basically create fashion content to go around it, and then they leave me a free whip hand to put together the editorial content. And that was, some of that came from working in magazines where every month or every week, depending on the frequency of your publication, you just die a little as you watch the sales, the advertising sales numbers just slowly diminish, which is obviously quite a different situation to different like a more publicly funded model. But it came from wanting a kind of a solidity of funding, which is so much of the battle. And thus far, as much as it might look compromised from the outside, my own experience as an editor, and hopefully the experience of those who've read it, is that the actual the pure editorial content in there is pretty untainted by the association.
Yeah.
How's it distributed?
It is distributed in a variety of different ways. It's bound to subscription copies of Metro. It sits in Barker stores. It goes out to their best purchasing customers. But one thing we did with this most recent issue, which I thought went really well, was we syndicated the features to sort of appropriate online publications, including
Pantograph Punch.
the Pantograph Punch with a Kim.com story, written by one of their editors, Hayden. It was spectacular.
Oh, that was the Lord retweet.
Yeah,
Best
totally.
day. Lord retweets your publication.
Yeah,
Stats are off the charts.
And so we put another story to Metro, and that was kind of, I think it worked for Barker's, worked for 1972, and hopefully for, obviously, if you got the Lord retweet, then that's
that was a good day for us.
cool.
Thank you.
No worries at all.
It's such an amazing model to me, though, and maybe it would be very hard to make that model work for anyone else in New Zealand, because, you had that sort of business relationship with Barker's, which also meant that they had that trust in you to produce something stylish, because obviously at the end of the day, they're after something that looks good, which is good for their brand, which is fashion brand. But like when so much of your sort of daily work as an editor is taken up with, ad sales, because unfortunately that is just the reality of modern publishing, I feel like that this model could potentially work really well and also work really disastrously, but in the wrong hands with a badly paired editor and brand. But I'm amazed that after 1972's success that there hasn't been more of those popping up. Because I feel like the brand is getting a lot of value for money.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it does feel like a new model. I mean, and the Spinoff has a similar thing in terms of its relationship with Lightbox. I happen to like the model because I remember working as an editor, and when Leonie's talking about the amount of time that's taken up with sales, it doesn't mean that we're out there selling, but so much of the time you're talking with your salespeople about how to mesh editorial content with a particular client's needs, and that is an inherently difficult task. If you have a genius salesperson who understands the publication and gets the editorial side, it can be a beautiful thing, and I think good things can come from it. But so often, I have this memory of a salesperson, very well intentioned and probably pretty skilled, but we were working. It was a music magazine, and she would bring in Your Home and Garden and talk about their kind of product integrations, and there would just be, it was just this endless frustration trying to figure out what, that there was just no way to replicate that element.
Because of the Backers Association, just trying to kind of figure out some of the thinking behind it. Do you feel like it was going to a particular audience and then putting it out on other platforms is helping that content reach a wider audience? Is that the strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it was like, I feel like the last issue was a bit of a landmark in terms of the quality of the content. We were, I worked harder on it, and it coincided with a redesign, and knowing that it was going to reach a very specific audience, but that there was a much larger one that would appreciate what it was, and so hence approaching the various publications which syndicated it. But the feedback from the brand has been really good, and it's absolutely something we intend to continue.
Yeah, and Leonie, with Mana Magazine, I'm not sure if you carried through with it, but at one stage, I know you approached the Wireless about having some of our content in the RSS feed.
Yeah, so our website works because we're a bi-monthly publication. We try and keep, so we've got an app and a website. You can download the app for free at mana.co.nz. And we see that as more of a news aggregate that's updated a few times a day. So obviously we can sort of still be presenting relevant news rather than having to wait every 2 months. And so what we do, we've modelled it on another digital asset that was already owned by Corfi Media called Photographer, where basically they have these digital partnerships with blogs and websites all around the world, and none of it's paid for. It's just content partnerships, so that their content is reaching a wider audience. So we approached a bunch of different people as well, and so we get most of our news content from Radio Wātea. We've got a partnership with Te Papa and Auckland Museum, so that's where a lot of our heritage stuff comes from. We get content from a couple of just independent Māori bloggers who just update very regularly. And then we add our own content as well. And so it's worked out really well. And obviously it has to be sort of specifically Māori content, which, to be honest, there's not a heck of a hell of a lot out there. So we do have to generate a lot of content ourselves. But I feel like it's a really good way of just sort of distributing the culture, I guess, and those that are sort of working within Māori media and sort of supporting each other. I mean, I know from the outside it kind of looks like we're just stealing people's content. But
syndicating.
Syndicated. But it's worked. I think it's worked out quite well for everyone.
We're a small enough country as well that that's always going to happen, really.
Well, certainly at the Wireless, because we're publicly funded, we just want our content to get out in front of as many people as possible, and that goes for the whole of Radio New Zealand as well. I think it was yesterday there was a deal announced between RNZ and MSN, so there's now Radio New Zealand stories going on MSN. Definitely with the Wireless, we try and make our content really shareable, and in the future, I wouldn't mind creating content for other like-minded platforms too.
Going back tangentially to my non-responsive editor's emails. When you're freelancing, I've got just salt in the wounds. But when you're freelancing, you're obviously pitching to whoever is going to publish your work to some degree. and you may not ever get responses back from editors that you're pitching to. You don't want to be pitching to multiple outlets or platforms with the same idea. How long do you have to wait before you take it somewhere else?
You don't.
You don't.
Like, I mean, obviously don't do it 15 minutes later, but if it's like a timely story, or if you really believe in it and they haven't replied in 24 hours, you've got no obligation to them. You know, like it's up to you. Like if there's another publication where it work, go there. Like periodically they'll emails back up for different reasons, but that culture of just never replying, which totally exists amongst editors, you know, it's awful and it shouldn't exist. It's like I really struggle.
Publicists.
Oh yeah, publicists are a different animal.
They get ignored.
Yeah. No, look, I don't have any issue with publicists, but absolutely, Leonie's absolutely right to say that. But you know, yeah, I really think that you know, you shouldn't feel under any obligation to sit around waiting for them. And if you're an editor and you don't reply to email, it's kind of a scumbag, I think. Because man, it's the worst feeling in the world, just sitting there like with that kind of nervous energy that gradually dissipates into like a pit of horror. You know, it's horrible. We shouldn't put people through that.
I mean, I'm pleased, Marcus, that you brought up a sporting metaphor earlier, because I was worried that I was going to be the only one who would. But in the same,
I can go into basketball.
but in the same,
Let's not.
in the same way that, you know, great managers and great coaches aren't always necessarily great players. I'm assuming, therefore, that to be a great editor, you don't need to be a great writer for people who want to get into editing. But do you have to have a modicum of talent as a writer, or can you get away with just understanding the mechanics of writing without having the flair for it, if that makes sense?
I feel like both of those things need to be true. But then again, you're kind of making us say we think we're really great writers.
Oh, I think I'm a great writer. I don't know. I think, yeah.
I feel like you can have a feel for a really amazing writer without being one yourself. Absolutely.
I think if, sorry, go on.
Like, well, I mean, it's like the coach analogy. You know, you don't have to be an amazing basketball player to know talent when you see it. And I mean, I've spent more years as an editor than I have actually as a writer. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I edit much better writers than I will ever be on a daily basis. Yeah.
I think like there's this awful thing that happens at writers' festivals where there's an audience question section and someone always gets up and goes, do you have any advice for young writers? and everyone wants to know, like, give me something. And the answer is always read. And I think if an editor is an exceptionally good and wide reader, then perhaps the writing is more, it's an instinctual thing as opposed to necessarily an act. But if you're not interested in language, that's a problem. But I mean, there's no editors, I don't think, in that basket.
I think understanding the mechanics of writing is so crucial, because that leads to good writing. Like, some people do have lots of natural flair, but I think they can always be improved by an understanding of mechanics. And you know, it's great to kind of, I guess, develop and like learn how things work. And as an editor, it makes the job so much easier. You can pinpoint exactly why something isn't working. So where, you know, the writer might be reading through and going, you know, come back to you and say, look, this section just really isn't working for me. I can't figure out why. You're able to unpick that. Yeah.
Do you prefer editing or writing, Duncan?
I hate them both. No, I don't know. I love them both. Shit. There's some elements of editing that are like, it's kind of magical, or like, you know, I don't think there's any feeling I like more than getting an amazing piece and then putting it up and watching it fly, you know, and like. And you know, like, okay, so this is probably going to be embarrassing for Alex. Alex Casey, my Spinoff staff writer, is in the audience here. I think it's just like the most extraordinary talent, and the kind of working with her, editing her, and kind of putting her on jobs and watching and not knowing what exactly is going to come back, but just always being kind of dazzled by it is really, really freaking cool. And I think that that feeling, extrapolated on like there's a kind of feels like there's a group of young writers coalescing around the Spinoff, who, and that's true of all of them to an extent. And that is probably as the older I get, the more I have that feeling. The more like writing I can just sort of look up at this, especially because like the type of writing I enjoy the most is really long, really involved, really tediously researched and reported features, and that you can only do sort of 4 or 5 a year if you're lucky, and I haven't done one in probably 2 years, and it's the amount of time they take versus the kind of dopamine they give back versus how quick the hits can be as an editor is so I probably would, if I had to choose, lean towards editing now. Plus, editing online, as you guys will know, when you have like a hit and you can just watch it kind of rush out into kind of social media and so on, and get that kind of instant gratification of it, man, it's a pretty cool feeling.
It's a great feeling.
And it's hard, like it's a hard balance, I think, because I think I mentioned this to Aaron in an email. I feel a real sort of obligation to be part of a critical voice, and to stop kind of talking about criticism in New Zealand, and criticism doesn't have to mean like everything's bad, more talking about value. I think the Pantograph Punch is sort of at the forefront of talking or making action in a lot of these conversations that seem to be had around like, why isn't there more poetry published, and why don't we value this, and why don't we value that? But a lot of those pieces, and I am literature editor, which is sort of the, I don't know, doldrums of the editorial world, it doesn't have a lot of traffic, but and when you email people saying, hey, we'd really love to do a story, they ask you for your hit rate. And I can't necessarily say, well, this article got 6 billion views like Marcus can, but I do still think there's value in it. But it's very difficult. We live in a time of shares and clicks and tweets, and there are certain subjects that won't get that, but they still need to be published, I think, which, I don't know, it's interesting.
Here.